grant coordinator for the Restorative Justice Program. Just a reminder that this is a public meeting, so we are recording the meeting today. With that, if you can please use the raise hand function on Teams and verbally give any questions or comments while we're going through our discussion today, just so we can make sure to capture it on record as part of this meeting. It is a public meeting, as I said, so members of the public may be in attendance. However, from here on out, I'll be addressing the Grant Advisory Committee. We have time set aside towards the end of the meeting for public comment. So if you are a member of the public, please hold your comments until then. And GAC members, just to keep everything consistent and on track, if you have questions about a specific application, please address your questions to CJC and we'll follow up with the applicant rather than you conversing with them directly, just to make sure everything's on record and the meeting flows and all of that. Here is today's anticipated meeting schedule. So we're just going to do quick welcome and roll call, go into the roles and responsibilities in the application review, which is mostly review with some new information, spend the bulk of our meeting actually doing the final application review, and then we'll have that public comment period and next steps. So let's go ahead and do roll call. Avery?
Brandon Brown.
Here.
Elaine
Morning,
Walters.
Here.
Kathleen Meehan Coop.
Here.
Harry Naughton, I believe, is not able to attend today. Shannon Wilson.
Here.
Simon Fulford.
Here.
Michael Kaiser.
Here.
Tristan Edwards.
Here.
And Jimena Ospina Todd.
Here.
Wonderful. We have quorum, Rima.
Thank you so much. And that is excellent news. So GAC roles and responsibilities in application review. So as you've seen before, you know, the CJC staff's part in the application review is to review applications for completeness, for adherence to program rules and priorities, and then to ensure the Grant Advisory Committee apply program rules consistently. Your role is really to evaluate applications, discuss them collaboratively, and then approve which applications are sent to the Commission for funding authorization, and then the Commission then authorizes those applications for funding. We have some new information on conflicts, so bear with me as we go through it. You know, Grant Advisory Committee members are, for the purposes of this meeting, public officials, and as such, you have an ethical responsibility because you influence the operations of state government. If you have an actual or potential conflict, and that is if a public official participates in an action which would or could result in financial benefit or loss for that official or for your relatives or business, then you may be said to have an actual or potential conflict. On top of that, our commission tends to abstain when there's a potential public perception of impropriety. So that's when neither conflict exists, but there is some maybe tertiary relationship with the applicant, either personally or for your relative or business. So even though you're not directly benefiting from it, it could appear that that relationship is too close. So just as a practice, our commission tends to abstain in those situations as well. So anything that's related to the county that they work in, even if it's not the same agency, they tend to abstain from that. And we're trying to kind of standardize that. So we would encourage folks to follow that as well. if you have any questions about your individual possible actual or potential conflicts, you can always reach out to the Oregon State Ethics Commission. So if you have an actual or potential conflict or a perception of potential conflict, please disclose that relationship to staff. And we do need that to be, disclosed on record during today's meeting. And then you would also want to not participate in deliberations for that application or vote to approve or not to approve an award. So here's some sample language for folks. If you need to abstain for a specific application, the DOJ has provided us with some verbiage that you might want to use. I need to provide notice of a potential conflict of interest on this agenda item. This is the reason why I serve on the board, or I am an employee of this organization, which has submitted a grant application and is currently under consideration by the committee. So that's some sample language to help you out. I do want to note here, we also got clarification um, on quorum and the number of votes needed to actually pass things. So we do need to have a quorum of 6 people voting on each application. So we'll be, if there are conflicts, we'll be paying attention to that, and we'll follow up on that specific application if there are any issues or we need to get somebody to vote. Hopefully that situation won't come up, but just if I give additional instructions, that's why, is we need to have that 6 people voting for the application to be approved. Any questions or concerns about conflicts at this time? Nope. All right. I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll continue. So from there, we're just going to go into the final application review. As you may have noticed, the budget requests were substantially over the amount of available funds. So we've structured this application review process to try and be as objective and consistent as possible. So it's going to look a little different than we've done in the past. So, please feel free as we go through it to raise your hand and ask any questions or state any concerns that come up as we go through the presentation. So here are the final applications that we received. We did have 2 folks that didn't submit a final application. So we have a total of 12 that applied throughout the process. And here's a breakdown of the final scores. I do want to note, so the total score available was 100 plus 7 additional points for the non-mandatory program preferences. We were really pleased again with how thoroughly and completely applicants responded to those questions that we sent. Overall, folks were really great. We were able to get through a lot of those eligibility questions we had in particular. So we're really grateful to that, for all the applicants for that. And then some scores did shift a little bit based on the budget and how thorough folks were in describing their narratives, their budget narratives in particular. So I did want to note on this slide that Union County is here listed as not eligible. So it was the staff's analysis that Union County did not meet the eligibility requirements for the restorative justice grant. So at this time, we want to just confirm whether or not the Grant Advisory Committee is in agreement with this. So we want to go ahead and vote at this point to accept, whether or not to accept the CJC staff analysis that Union County is not eligible for funding under this grant. So if you want to discuss this or go ahead and vote, the floor is yours.
This is Simon, and I'm in full agreement with the CJC staff assessment. I don't think they meet the program eligibility criteria or the intent for sure. So I approve or support this recommendation.
This is Kathleen, and I agree as well.
Why don't we go ahead? I don't know if anyone has any discussion on the other side, but if not, we can go ahead and just do a roll call vote. And Avery, do you mind helping out with that?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Brandon Brown,
I'm in agreement.
Elaine Walters,
I also agree.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Agree.
Shannon Wilson,
Agree.
Simon Fulford,
Agree.
Michael Kaiser,
Agree.
Tristan Edwards,
I'm abstaining.
and Jimena Ospina Todd.
I agree.
All right, that passes, Rena.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, our requested funds were significantly higher than what we have available. In total, we got requests for $8,536,491.74. And please note that this takes into consideration a few corrections on some of the calculations in some of the budgets. So if you added them up separately, it might be slightly different. But that's our starting point for today. We only have 4 million available, so we need to cut about 4.5 million. So our process for today is, well, let me back up a step. So what has emerged as CJC's standard process across different grants is that, staff do our analysis on the budgets. We go through, we take out unallowable items. We do some sort of base level analysis on what we would recommend to cut as kind of a floor to start the conversation, and then leave it up to the various grant review or grant advisory committees to guide the rest of that process. We used to just do all of the cuts in the various grant advisory or grant review committees, and it just is a really big lift. Takes a long time, and I think everyone gets fatigued, and the objectivity and consistency kind of peters out at a certain point. So we do have CJC staff recommended cuts of about 2.757 million. And we'll go through what our methodology was for that and the reasons behind the decisions we made on those cuts. But we do, recommend that you accept those cuts as sort of the baseline or floor for starting. And then we have some scenarios that we built on top of that we'll get to in a second. And for the decisions that we do at the beginning of this presentation, I do want to note that they apply to all applications. The way we set this up to minimize, to minimize the loss of members that can vote and to really try and maintain that consistency and objectivity. We're going to try and go through a couple of larger decisions that impact all of the applications first. So folks can vote on these decisions because they're not individual application decisions. And then you'll just want to abstain later when we get to the individual application where you might have a conflict. So with that, we'll go ahead and move forward. So here are some of the considerations that we went through when we did our staff analysis. You know, we wanted to make sure that the budgets were in compliance with the rules, statutes, and requirements like we always do. We wanted a consistent, objective methodology that supported fair and equitable cuts across all applicants, and to minimize those conflicts of interest, especially with this group, since we have so many conflicts that we're trying to manage. One of our considerations that we built into this model was really preserving existing services to clients. That's been noted previously as you know, a priority for this group and also for our commission. So we kind of built that into the model. And then in our previous discussions in earlier grant advisory committee meetings related to this application process, it was noted that you folks wanted to build in some type of look at performance into the process. So we talked through various scenarios on what that would look like based on the information that we have available. So we have a couple of scenarios, different scenarios that build in different definitions of performance. So the first one is based on application score, and you'll see how that plays into it when we get to the next couple slides. Contract performance, which is based on the current contract expenditure rate. And that really looks at, you know, how well our current grantees have been spending their funds in relation to their ask over the last, you know, 3-4 year period. So I tend to think of that as scaling down the ask based on what folks have actually been able to expend. We did discuss some of the other data points that we looked at in the application, such as, you know, total FTEs, number of clients, some of those other, you know, staff training hours, some of those things that we looked at and discussed in detail in the preliminary application. But there's just some issues with we don't have standards for those things set for this program. So they didn't seem, and the data was not as consistent, so they didn't seem like a good measure to do this process on. Are there any questions or comments or concerns at this point? No? Okay. So what
Sorry,
yeah, sure.
Rima, Simon here again. Just a comment. I'm not. This is not asking anyone to go back because we've got a lot to achieve today. I guess I do question or challenge if you know, expenditure of your budget. You know, if you are spending 100% of your budget, that, you know, as it were, being a positive. Yes, that can be. It's about good contract management.
Yep.
On the other hand, I can I can spend all the money that I'm given in a grant and not deliver anything, and that could be a very spurious measure of contract performance.
I thank you very much for bringing that up, and you know, keep that in mind as we move forward, because
Yep.
the scenarios deal with different things. So there's one scenario based on application score, one on expenditure rate. So, you know, if you have any concerns about a specific scenario, please keep that in mind and bring it up again.
And sorry, Rima, before we move on, I also wanted to just make a comment. Two things. First, in terms of kind of the score of the application, I think I raised this at the last meeting, but I have a little bit of difficulty with the scoring because it's very much based on kind of like the self-report of the program. And I had just kind of observed some situations where there was what I perceived to be an inconsistency. So, you know, a community-based organization saying we don't disqualify people based on criminal history, even if they have a system partner that's going to do that. And so effectively, there is a disqualification based on criminal history, but it's not reflect. You know, that's just one example, but I think that can show up in different ways and how applicants score themselves. The other thing, and I recognize that there's issues with kind of how to compare these things, but to me, the number of cases that a program has received is a big indicator of whether they are successful or not. Especially, yeah, I mean, just we want cases to be going through these programs, and if we have a program that meets all the other qualifications but barely has any clients, then I think that that's something that we should be taking into consideration.
Thank you. And again, please keep those in mind as we move forward. So what did the staff analysis, how did we come up with those recommended cuts? The first step was to, as I said, remove any unallowable items and items that I'm calling out of scope. So that that included any calculation adjustments due to obvious errors. We made those corrections. We removed any strictly unallowable items that we just can't fund. And then we had this category of what I'm calling out of scope line items. So that's costs not directly related to the core program expenses or ones that were unusually high compared to other similar line items from other applicants, or costs related to program expansion. So that was the first step of the staff analysis. The second was to, we included with the application a second tab to the budget request, which had the applicant actually identify where cuts could be made up to 20%. So we took those cuts or reductions to the line items that the applicants identified, and we applied those to the budget. And I do want to note here that the items that we're calling quote unquote out of scope, especially ones that were, higher compared to similar items, were also generally identified in this 20% cut. They weren't cut twice, but they kind of overlapped. So so those were the first two cuts made. And then based on this concept of maintaining, services to clients, we wanted to preserve existing staff, particularly since the personnel are such a huge portion of all of these budgets. We did go through and remove any staff that were listed as new or existing, not currently CJC funded, and we kept only the staff that were listed as existing, currently funded with RJ. And then we did an administrative cost adjustment to make sure that the administrative costs for each applicant were still under that 15% maximum threshold. So going through all of those adjustments took out $2,757,305. Any questions or concerns about that methodology?
No. I have some thoughts, but I'd rather get through and then share things when appropriate, maybe based on each program personally.
Okay. So for this process, since the staff recommended cuts are kind of the baseline where we're starting from, I do want to take a vote at this point. So if folks have discussions specifically related to the methodology, now would be a great time to do it. And we will want to vote now to approve applying these staff recommended cuts, just so we have this starting point to go from, of the $2.8 million cut off the bottom line. So if you have questions or concerns at this point, please, voice them. Otherwise, we can take a vote to apply this staff recommended cuts.
I'm just a little, this is maybe the one at a time kind of question, and that is the removal of personnel identified as new or existing, not currently CJC. So I know that there's the preservation of existing staff, but I'm wondering if there might be exceptions to this based on what people did in their pilot and then what they've discovered they need in terms of capacity. And so if just doing this blanket removal of any new Did you see as staff any place where that application was more impactful potentially for the integrity of the proposal? Before I feel like just doing a straight cut, I'm trying to think myself if I noticed any, but I just wanted to know if that's a discussion item that might be worth taking a few minutes on.
So, it did for implementation programs that that didn't include a lot of staff in their planning phase. This did have a bigger impact. However, again, we were coming from the perspective of maintaining services to clients, and there was just the proportion of personnel funds to other types of funds was so high, we needed to do significant cuts in that area. But it did, I would say, impact those implementation programs more. And we did build that into one of the scenarios we'll get into later. But yeah, you're
Yeah, so that, and then what Tristan was saying as well, I don't see any place in this kind of consistent sort of effort, and maybe this is where the other 2-point-some million comes from, is where it looks like a very high price tag per community members served. And so just having it be equal feels really like it misses that. So I'm hoping that if this is a starting point for some consistency, that there is also room for us to think about exceptions or further reductions based on other information that we get in this conversation.
There is absolutely, this is a starting point. And as I mentioned, we discussed how that might look, but we don't have any standards for different types of programs and how many clients are appropriate. So that's not an objective measure that we could implement at this point. It would be great if we built some, but we don't have any. So it didn't feel like it would be an objective measure. And Simon?
Yeah, so I had a very similar question to Elaine. So Elaine, thank you for voicing it. And I guess I appreciate, I think this methodology makes total logical sense. And like all things, sometimes logic doesn't hold up in practice, as it were. And if there's room for it when we're looking at individual applications, if we as the advisory committee have the authority, the scope to add money back in, if we think once we get there, like this grant, they said they need new staff to then do further implementation, etc., and that makes a different type of logical sense if there's ability to add money back in, and similarly, get to another program and say, this program could possibly survive even with 50% less staff, even if they're currently funded. If we can have that sort of authority, if this is more like a starting point to get some sort of baseline that we can tweak up and down, is that possible, as it were? Is that the approach that you're walking us through?
So this is all suggested. So you could completely decide on a different methodology. We would have to take a significant break and try and rework all the numbers. But it is a recommendation. If we start adding money back in, I do worry about maintaining that objectivity and that consistency. So there's definitely a line there.
But isn't
looks like Kathleen had her hand up as well. So
yeah, go on. I have thoughts.
And I guess my question kind of along those lines, the recommendations are being made by CJC staff are based upon maybe the assumption that all of the proposals except for union, which we just voted on, would be recommended to move forward. if that was not the decision that ultimately potentially would impact these recommendations as well, correct?
So yes, we have 4 scenarios that we'll get into that we built off this baseline, one of which just takes the high scoring applicants, so it wouldn't fund everyone, but the other 3 assume that all applicants would get some amount of funding. And I think Tristan had her hand up next.
Yeah, so I just had a question about, this kind of like trying to be objective. You know, we're here to assess the quality of the applications. I mean, from my perspective, this is a time for us to be subjective about these applications, which ones we think are, worthier investments and which ones we think maybe could be scaled back based on our review of the application and our subjective determination of which ones are doing better and which ones are not. And so I feel, I guess I kind of feel like the need to push back a little bit on an attempt to be purely objective in the way that we're assessing all of these applications.
So I have a couple other hands up, so let's go through the comments and then, yeah, so I think Shannon had her hand up next.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I totally appreciate what staff tried to do, but I have similar concerns because it seems like it's a little bit premature. So I would personally, like my vote, if we were calling for a vote, would be to not use that as an objective criteria, preservation of existing staff. I don't know where others, I definitely was able to kind of like, I don't know if staff did this, but identify like there were some applicants that seemed to be more in kind of still that like initial pilot program, learning, discovery phase. And so maybe that would be a place to be objective for those applicants, that we kind of like say, okay, that this is the certain amount for brand new applicants, initial grants or whatever like that. But there might be another way to create a different objective criteria other than just, the staff you have versus like the staff that's actually meeting the need in the community, or that could meet the needs. So.
Okay, and I think Elaine, you had your hand up next.
I actually think Simon's in front of me.
Oh, Simon?
Well, I'm just going to say yes to everything that everyone else has said, and definitely the criteria number 3, preserving existing staff, I think is inappropriate.
Same here. I don't think I agree with that as an objective appropriate deciding feature. Number 2 at least had applicant input into where they could prioritize and how they would cut. If we end up needing to make the cuts deeper, we can go back to folks, or we can give some, but I don't think of the preservation of existing staff as an objective measure for the purposes of making decisions without considering each application in its own right, and potentially looking at reductions with the participation of the folks we fund. So I don't agree with leaving this on here as one of the cut areas across the board.
Okay, so we can, as I said, we can make changes to this model. We will need to take a break, and I would ask that we, well, let me see how I can say this. So we do need to be consistent and objective when we do make the budget decisions, so there's equity in the way funds are made. You can disagree with this recommended cut, and we can retool the model, which will take some time, and we'll have to take a break from the meeting and come back, and that will increase our number of cuts that we need to make overall to about 2.6 million instead of 1.8 million. I would recommend that if that is how we want to move forward, that we do the next decision, we vote to move forward, making this change, and then we vote on the scenario that we want to apply so that we can make the changes to the scenario as well at the same time. I do also want to say that, again, we don't want to get into the individual budgets before we make the scenario decision, because we want everyone to be able to vote on the scenario we're choosing without getting into the individual budgets, because we have too many conflicts at that point. And we have to have 6 people voting on each individual vote.
I think what we're saying is that it isn't our perspective that the preservation, that using that number 3 is an objective measure, given the realities of the program content. It wouldn't have an equal impact. It wouldn't be experienced as a logic that would be objective. And so I agree that if we do 1 and 2, that leaves us with some other scenario decisions, and that might be simply increasing the cuts, or we may end up finding that there are some programs that don't get funded based on what the group decides. So I don't think we know what the final deficit is yet. And I agree that I don't know what a third scenario option other than an increased across the board cut would be.
So we can get into that, but is everyone in agreement that the staff recommended cuts are okay, except for this item number 3, and we want to remove this item number 3, which will ultimately mean we have more to cut during this discussion today, but folks don't agree with this number 3. Is that correct? Does anyone want to propose a vote and second that, so we can accept the recommended cuts minus the preservation of existing staff, the step number 3?
I'm happy
Yeah.
to.
Go
I'm
ahead,
happy to
Simon.
propose that.
Okay.
And I second.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do a vote for that, Avery.
Brandon Brown,
I agree.
Elaine Walters,
I agree.
Kathleen Meehan Kuth,
Agree.
Shannon Wilson,
Agree.
Simon Fulford,
Agree.
Michael Kaiser,
Agree.
Tristan Edwards,
Agree.
Jimena Ospina Todd.
Agree.
Okay, so the next step is to look at these scenarios, and so this remainder is obviously going to be different, but we're going to talk about what pathway we want to use to move forward to get rid of, I think it's like 2.8 million that we should have here at this point. And we'll get that number for you as soon as we make this next decision. So the different scenarios that we came up with based on the metrics that we had available. The first scenario is fund the highest scoring applicants until we run out of funds. Second scenario is scaled funding for eligible applicants based on their application score. And there are cuts still remaining if we do that. We are still over, and it'll be over even more than that at this point. So that's funding everyone based on their application score, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. Scaled funding for eligible applicants based on expenditure rate, which we talked about, and there were some concerns about. But again, I like to think of this as scaling it based on past expenditures. So if somebody consistently overestimates their budget, we're scaling it back to a more realistic number. So, we call it performance, but I tend to think of it as scaling it back. And then the last scenario is a haircut of just 31% across all eligible applicants, although this would be much higher now because we have more funds back in the pot. So for scenario 2, this is the, scaling that we came up with. If the score range is 90 to 100, they get 80% of their remaining ask. If their score was between 80 to 89, they would get 65% of their remaining ask, and this is on top of the staff recommended cuts. And then if they scored 70 to 79, they would get 50% of their remaining ask. So that would be the scenario 2. And then scenario 3 is very similar based on expenditure rate. 75% expenditure, then they would get 80% of their remaining ask, etc. So I see Tristan's hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, two main thoughts. One, I've expressed my misgivings with the way that the applications are scored. I would really strongly push back against basing amount of funding based on those scores. I think there's just a lot of flaws in the way that those scores are calculated. The other piece of this is this assumes that we are funding every single application, which just doesn't seem like it is financially wise, especially since we've got several new programs that are asking to pilot. Does it really make sense to pilot every single new program when we don't know about the financial security of this grant program as a whole? Any new investment we make means that that program is going to build. And so if we are in a scenario in 2 years where we're still dealing with $4 million and we've got all these new programs, it doesn't seem like a wise financial decision necessarily to fund every single one of these applications. And I think it would make sense to first have a conversation about, are there any applications that we think just aren't wise to move forward with? And I think that could really help with, taking away some of, seeing what cuts are being made. It seems like that should be a prerequisite to the conversation about what budgets we're cutting.
Okay, I think Elaine was next.
Thank you, Tristan. That makes a lot of sense to me, what you just said, especially setting up programs who may become dependent on funding that doesn't exist. We have still not asked folks to incorporate any sort of sustainability model without these funds, and I think that's going to keep being a problem for us. But also, could you explain to me what you mean by expenditure rate? Is this just a higher cost programming per client served, or just straight cost?
This is just straight amount expended over the last 3 years compared to their total budget.
I see. So it's people being able to spend out their budget. Okay. So again, I guess I would really question this being a particularly useful scenario decider. If it's based on that, especially given the various states of development and partnership so many of the organizations have been in the last couple of years, and to use that as a projection going forward, I think is problematic. So.
Okay, and I think Kathleen is next.
Could you go back to scenario number 2 briefly? If I understand correctly, this is saying that based upon the score, like for instance, the green line from 70, we would give them, after the initial cuts, we're looking at a percentage of giving them 50% of their budget. Scenario 2 concerns me because I think a lot of programs potentially wouldn't even be able to run effectively or even potentially achieve that if we've taken 20% and then taken additional 50%. That would be a concern with being actually able to implement the program entirely. And I agree with a number of the other comments that have been made already as well.
Thank you. And Simon, your hand is up as well.
Yeah, I don't think the scoring matrix is a very sound criteria for the current expenditure rate. I still think there's, again, as Kathleen just said there, some programs, it may not even be feasible to run it on a massively reduced, and therefore it'd be more useful to allocate those funds to preserve other programs at a slightly higher level. I think there's at least one application that it doesn't meet, even though it seemed to have scored high. Personally, I don't think it actually fits the intent of the grant program, and that would take out an entire funded possibility. And again, I think, once we look at some of them, I think there are criteria around just how effective and efficient they are as what they've achieved to date. And that should be, well, it is to me. And then, I think that's a pretty strong criteria and assessing the program's effectiveness going forwards.
So it sounds, okay, I have one comment on the scoring. So the scoring that we do internally is based on that Excel score sheet, and the scores come directly from the grant requirements, the things that are outlined in the rules, and how those were defined previously by the GAC. So those scores are based on what this grant has identified as being what the purpose of this grant is, and that is what is in the language of the rules and statutes, and then what was previously discussed and determined as how those played out in a program. So that is our objective criteria that we have. Those scores, we have to go by the score. We always score applications, and that is our primary objective criteria for funding awards, and that is how it is across all programs. It sounds from the other concerns that were brought up that the scenario one is ultimately kind of what we're leaning towards, because in scenario one, we would not fund all the programs. We would fund the ones that meet those criteria for the grant based on our objective analysis. It looks like Elaine.
So the objective analysis, though, for the scoring was CJC staff. And so I guess I'm looking for a hybrid scenario one, which actually incorporates our take on the final quality of the application. And I guess my question, so that it can't just be CJC staff and then we fund the highest ones, or our input is not relevant. And it needs to be. And you read things maybe differently than we might. And so there's that. There's not, we can't pretend that there's not some level of interpreting or discretion or potential bias from any one of us that goes into this. So we're trying to balance each other out, which is why we exist. So there's that. So I would want to have something say a little bit different than high scoring applicants for that scenario one. And because maybe it's high ranked, not high scored, which would include score from staff and our input as well. And then my question is, were the
So
scores?
I do want to respond to.
Wait, let me ask the question though.
Okay.
Do the scores that you're using incorporate the additional feedback that you brought in?
Yes, they do. So everyone's narrative score did go up based on the feedback, and then any changes you see are based on how thorough the budget application was. And so, we did incorporate your feedback to the scoring based on their responses that they gave in the final application. So some of your feedback is incorporated. And again, this will get us a list. I think this is the closest to what you're saying, is scenario one, to get us a list on an agreement that we're not doing the scaled funding based on score. We're not doing the scaled funding based on expenditure rate. We're not funding everyone who we said is eligible with a haircut. So I think this is the closest scenario to what you're talking about that we could possibly move forward with. And I do just, okay, Tristan, your hand is up. I'll let you, or actually Simon, I think you were first, sorry.
Okay. I mean, I just really echo everything Elaine said. Again, all applications, you know, it's words on paper, and people can interpret those very differently. And you can, you know, person X can interpret that to say it meets this sort of thing. Person Y can interpret it. It says they think it says something different. You know, and then I do think this is where, you know, the CJC and the government is asking for the input of this advisory committee. You know, when I read an application personally and it mentions a community partner that has no idea that they're mentioned in the proposal, someone may say, oh, look, they've mentioned community partners, but that's false. And so it reads well, but in reality, it's not. Or, you know, the track record of success and how much a program has been successful in its implementation over 6 months or 3 years. Again, you can write lots of great things on a piece of paper, but then there's the subjective criteria of saying, have they been able to do what they intended to do? They could have spent all their money amazingly well, and like I said, just ran around in circles drinking coffee.
Yes.
I'm struggling.
I I completely get what you're saying, and we do absolutely rely on your expertise. I think there are a couple things that we're balancing. Our role is to be objective, so we are giving you what we determine to be objective, an objective starting point. And it's not just me scoring this. This is our team scoring it, coming up with averages, discussing it internally. But you also have to, you know, take your experience and expertise and try and apply that objectively and fairly across all applications. Otherwise, people can protest, and then we get into a different scenario. Because the actual funding decision does have to remain objective, and I think we have to keep that in mind. So I appreciate the comments, but what is in the application is our basis for how we make this determination. It's not outside knowledge, because then we are in the position where we're making determinations based on things that are not actually provided in the application, which is not allowed. We have to base it on what is in the application and our criteria on top of that. And I do want to say that CJC is the first place that I've worked that even allows this much back and forth. I've been a grant coordinator at many other agencies where the staff just do the scoring based on strictly what is written in the application, do not have a process for giving the applicants an opportunity to respond to questions or comments. So I think we are actually going above and beyond in that regard. And we still have to come back and bring it back to this objective level of what is written and provided in the application, and not our outside knowledge of what we know because we might work with that agency. That is not actually objective, and we cannot take that into consideration. So it's a balancing act. Like, I definitely hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to justify it, and it has to be objective and fair. Otherwise, we kind of have to scrap our process. There was another piece to that. I don't remember what it was, so we'll go on to Tristan. I think your hand was up.
Yeah, so I guess I think I am lacking clarity around what the role of the grant review committee is versus, what is our ability in terms of making this decision? Because I recognize, I did not look, I didn't have, I don't have the, maybe if you could go, well, eventually we'll need to go back to like who scored high and that kind of thing. But, you know, my memory of just kind of briefly looking at that slide was that the scoring for me did not look consistent with my understanding of kind of the intent of the grant and the rules and all of those things. And myself and several people on this committee who have been speaking up were on the grant review committee when we created those rules. And so it's not just us taking our you know, kind of understanding of the field of restorative justice and applying knowledge outside the grants. It's also, I think, that we're coming from a standpoint of having participated in developing these rules and knowing the intent behind them and not seeing that matchup with the scoring. And it troubles me that you know, being able to incorporate like number of clients and people served is not even, it's not able to go into the scoring. And that is something that matters to me a lot. And so I'm just, you know, you keep saying that this is like a starting point, but it also sounds like we are kind of, that we don't have a lot of discretion. And so I'm just,
This is a
yeah.
starting point, but we have to make the decision on the scenario before we can get into the individual applicants, because based on our latest feedback from the Department of Justice, we need to maintain a certain number of votes. We have too many conflicts within the commission. We have to maintain a certain number of votes. So we need to determine the larger strategy before we get into the individual budgets themselves.
Okay, so just a hypothetical, like if we're going through all the individual applications under scenario one, and we get to an application that's scored highly, but everybody on the grant review committee doesn't think we should give them any amount of money, is that something that,
you can choose to not recommend them, and we'll make adjustments. Scenario one, so that it is a starting place.
okay.
We're not saying that you have to accept. I mean, we will go through each application. If you don't want to fund something at that point, we can remove it. I think the scenario one is just the closest to what what you folks have identified. And I do just want to reiterate the point, like I completely understand and sympathize and agree with the wanting to use number of clients and staff to client ratio and stuff like that. It's just we don't have a standard at this point. So we can't make that determination. That's something that needs to be developed. You guys can put input. We can put it on record that that's why you made a specific decision. But we can't objectively analyze based on that criteria because there is no criteria set for it, if that makes sense. And Shannon, your hand was up.
Yeah, thank you. I completely understand why you have to set out objective criteria at the front end. But I think that like a step that may have been missed is in developing like these different scenarios. I think you could have, maybe the commission could get some consensus from this advisory committee as to what those scenarios would be, because I think the concern is I think we're experiencing right now, there appears to be like a lack of kind of transparency. And I think a lot of like what we do as an advisory committee is we maybe offer some public conversation, public analysis, and balancing to bring that transparency. And it actually, I think, serves the commission and serves the state of Oregon a lot better, because you have folks, that's why we have like a diverse group of folks here that are bringing different interests and, yeah, just like care for the community in different ways. And if we're not incorporating those perspectives and experiences in developing these scenarios, they're going like this is what we're seeing right now, like, because those perspectives weren't, or even just like this conversation didn't happen to develop the scenarios. But I think that there are, I mean, like Tristan mentioned, like we were part of the same group. A lot of us were part of the same group that developed these things way back when, and we did reach consensus on a lot of things. And so I think we're kind of used to that process maybe. And so this feels a little bit difficult where we're told, oh, here are the different boxes that you're going to have to decide yes or no. And it's like, well, wait a second. I mean, even when I was reviewing, I was thinking about previously, like kind of what we developed and what was of value. And I think what's kind of in the back of my mind, I'm just going to add this, is that it appears that this type of funding, particularly right now, might be a little bit fragile. And so really wanting to push for that fiscal accountability and just make really like the strongest recommendations that we can, um, uh, use an objective criteria, because we want the funding to continue. And if we aren't transparent with, like, why we recommended or advised that funding be used for different scenarios, I think that we won't have that information to pass forward to the commission and then to lawmakers to secure funding in the future. So I just want to add that. So I think that I think a couple things, like if you're saying that these are the scenarios and then we can then discuss the criteria that we know to use and deviate up or down, is that what you're saying? And this is just kind of like out the gate. Okay. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. Because I just don't want, my fear is that we apply a scenario and then we're not able to discuss things further.
We're absolutely going to, and when we get into the actual individual applications, we go through the line items. It's just, again, based on our recent feedback from the Department of Justice, we wanted everyone to be able to participate in the discussion and make votes on the discussion of the larger funding strategy. So I know this is a little frustrating because it feels backward at this point, but this was the best way we could think of. So everyone could discuss the total funding strategy before we get into the individual applications, just because we have so many conflicts that we're managing, and their feedback is we need to have a certain number of votes to pass any individual budget forward. So I am glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad we're doing this piece up front. It still is, in my mind, better to do this at the front end so then we can know how to proceed from here, I guess, if that makes sense. But we're absolutely listening to your questions and concerns. Elaine, it looks like your hand is up as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate that we're looking at a starting point. I also worry that if we don't add a little something in the fund high scoring applicants, that people are going to have the right to appeal against this. And so I do want to make sure that somehow this says fund high ranking applicants rather than high scoring applicants, because if it's the combination of the score and our feedback that is ultimately the recommendation, that feels less contestable than having it just say fund high scoring. If I scored high and you didn't fund me, I'm going to have a reason for a grievance and an appeal. And I just want to be really thoughtful that somehow it's visible and explicit in our scenario that our engagement and feedback is part of that scenario one. So it can't just say high scoring, or we can just figure out where the budget ends and go home. And so if it's high scoring plus the ranking of the committee members, then that to me is a way to frame that scenario that's gonna stand. And if I were one of the participants or applicants sitting on this call listening to this, it seems to me that we really want to be very clear in our scenario. So I don't want to just leave it fund high scoring applicants, or I think we're not doing our job and we're not transparent.
Okay, we can do scenario one and change the verbiage to fund high ranking applicants, which includes a combination of score and grant advisory committee feedback. I do want to say that everyone has a right to protest anyways, no matter what. And also, just based on the statute and rules, we will have to document any decision not to fund that you folks make has to be documented as well. So, you know, we need to do that as part of the process anyways. So are folks okay with that? If we change scenario 1 to be high ranking applicants, fund high ranking applicants, and that is a combination of score and whatever other criteria you folks come up with today. Does that sound appropriate to move forward with?
Yes, I think that sounds appropriate.
Okay.
I think so too.
Okay.
I think there's hesitancy, but yes.
Okay.
There was not a
again,
resounding everyone coming off mic saying, yay!
it's hard. I understand it's hard to do when we're not looking at the individual budgets. You guys are so wonderful at looking at things in great detail. But just this was kind of the strategy that we came up with based on this new information we got from DOJ. So I appreciate you bearing with me. I think it'll be fine once we get into it. But so if we want to change the scenario 1, we will need a few minutes to kind of make those changes to the presentation, get rid of extra information. So if we could have a few minutes break, that would be fantastic while we do that. And then we can come back and get into the individual applications.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, Rena. I just, since we're on record, and I think this is clear, but I just want to say first, like, thank you for bearing with us through all of this. I think, you know, part of the reason for all of our, I mean, the reason for all of our feedback is because today is a really serious day. We're having, you know, we have not even half the amount of money to meet the requests that were made. And we're aware that, you know, there are budget issues abounding moving forward, within the state nationally. And so I think we're all just trying to be really thoughtful and smart about how these allocations are made. And so, yeah, thank you for guiding us through this process and also, being responsive to kind of the feedback that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, we are in this together. So can we just get a vote on record so we have that clear that we're moving forward with the scenario 1 with those changes made? If I could get a motion and a second and vote on that, that would be fantastic.
This
I
is
move
Kathleen.
to accept the changes. This is Elaine.
I second that.
Okay. Avery, do you mind doing roll call vote?
Yep. Brandon Brown,
I'm in agreement.
Elaine Walters,
Agree.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Agree.
Shannon Wilson,
Agree.
Simon Fulford,
Agree.
Michael Kaiser,
Agree.
Tristan Edwards,
Agree.
Jimeno Espina Todd.
Agree.
Excellent. All right, we are all in agreement. So on that note, let me think of how long of a break we need to do this. Let's try 20 minutes. I think we can get it done in 20 minutes. So at 9:35, let's reconvene and we'll
Okay.
get into the individual applications.
And you're gonna leave the meeting running and we'll just
Come back. Yep,
Come back.
exactly.
Okay.
Meeting will be running. I'm just going to take down the presentation, make some changes, and then we'll reconvene at 9:35. Right. Thank you, guys.
All right, it is 9:35. Staff do need more time to make these edits. So we'll go ahead and try to reconvene at 9:50.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Sorry that took a little additional time than we expected. So let's just get everyone on camera so we can see if we've lost anyone or if we can go ahead and get back on track. So it looks like most folks are back. Avery, do you mind doing roll call again? I know we lost one person because they had to leave for a while at least.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Brandon Brown,
I'm here. I'm having camera issues.
Elaine Walters,
I'm here.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Here.
Shannon Wilson,
I'm here.
Simon
Thank you.
Fulford,
I'm here.
Michael Kaiser. He, I believe, had to step out and will be back about 11:15. Tristan Edwards,
Present.
and then Jimena Ospina Todd.
I'm here.
Okay, and Carrie Naughton, but she is not available today. So we have quorum still.
Excellent. We're back and we still have quorum. That's great news. Thank you guys so much for your patience. That took a little longer than I anticipated. So we did make the changes to the staff recommended cuts. So as you can see, the total cut amount went down to about 1.9 million after taking out that preservation of existing staff. I updated the numbers there. So now we have about 2.6 million to cut. So those numbers kind of flipped. So I changed the language on this to fund high-ranking applicants instead of high scoring. So we're moving forward with that as you folks voted for. I did want to just remind you of some of the rules and statutes, just so it's in the forefront of our mind again. So eligible applicants, for this specific opportunity are established or implementation. The grant program requirements must be a community-based alternative to the criminal juvenile legal system that aims to center the needs of the harmed party and foster accountability, must be a front-end program. These are the grant program requirements. As noted, this is the basis for how we did our scoring. And these are the things that we can take into consideration when we're making these funding decisions. So the grant program requirements and the grant program preferences are the things that we are allowed to take into consideration. The grant applications must meet the requirements. You can show preferences based on this list of preferences here, although it must be articulated why a specific preference is given over another. So, offering services, rural underserved areas, culturally appropriate services, all those things that were built into that scoring criteria that we use to score the application. So they should be reflected in those final scores. I wanted to bring this slide up. We talked about this and we looked at this slide way back in the beginning when we first were putting together the RFGP. Things that are in scope are the types of information the application that we present to you folks and how preferences are applied. Things that are out of scope are any additional criteria and additional information not already included in the application. So this goes back to those comments about knowing the organization. We cannot consider that information. It has to be information that is articulated in the application. So scenario 1, fund high-ranking applicants. So everybody's on board with that and understanding we're all on the same page. So we're going to get into the actual applications now. So on this slide just is a few points. We didn't include all the information from the last preliminary presentation, when we went through the preliminary applications, I just highlighted the program description and a few other things that I thought you might want to keep in mind. There's the application summary that shows their total score. And Kathleen, it looks like your hand is up.
I have a conflict on this one.
Thank you for remembering to mention your conflict. And Tristan, your hand is up as well?
I also have a conflict.
Okay, and we should still have 6. Oh, no. So we can't actually vote on this one yet because we lost somebody and we need 6 people to be able to vote. So we can advise to wait on this one till Michael comes back at 11:15. So we can we can look at it and move forward without voting at this point. But
Rima, I think I was wrong. I think we do have 6 voting members, but let me just take a minute to confirm.
okay. And again, this is new guidance we got from the DOJ, so it is a little different than how we've done it in the past, but apparently this is how we need to be doing it. So while Avery is checking on quorum, looks like there are a couple hands up. Tristan, you put your hand up again? Oh, no? Okay, I'll just go on to Elaine then.
Just wondering the degree to which this review can, are we just going to be looking at the budgets? We're not going to be looking at numbers proposed served or any of the other application content?
So that should already be taken into account with the score. We have this information here. We didn't revisit the numbers served. Again, I felt a little shaky with that information still. We don't have any set standards for how many people should be served, or depending on the type of services, and that fluctuates very widely. You can discuss it since it is in the application. I didn't include it on the slide, but it can be discussed since it is in the application.
It's not in the final application, though. It must have been in the first application.
It's part of the whole application process, and many people did have to provide an update for that. But I see what you're saying.
Because we don't have equal information across every applicant.
Right.
We just have the final follow-up feedback, correct? Is that correct?
Yes, that is what we're looking at now.
Okay, so I felt a little bit at a loss without that detail, and I was kind of fantasizing that you were going to provide it, but that's okay. We can make do.
So here is the budget request from Deschutes County Early Adult Program. And this is just the summary. The allotted number here, this blue column, takes into consideration those staff cuts that were approved. And we backed out the removal of the new and not CJC funded staff. So this is what their budget line items look like at the moment. So what I propose doing at this point is maybe going through, just kind of taking a look at what's left in the budgets. You folks mentioned that there were some that you might not want to fund, and maybe having that discussion first, and then going back and doing the individual line items or percentage cuts, or however you want to get rid of whatever the remainder in excess funds is. So Elaine,
Rima,
is
can
your
I-
hand still up? Oh, you're on mute.
This is Simon. Yeah, I mean, so I personally, I'm not sure how useful on some of this getting into detail on the budgets. You know, I think that a lot of that is, I guess, discussion with the organization. I think the logic, how I think you've applied it, or the CJC has applied it on, cutting out, non-discretion. No, I don't know what seems like unessentials. I don't know if the advisory committee has I can't know how much I can or can't comment. I have some more general thoughts on overall on a program's budget, what seems appropriate or not or whatever, but in detail, should they have funding for training or not? That feels, I think we either apply something across the board, as I think you've done. I guess I support some of that logic as I think I see it. And yes, there's some overall programs that I have, I think, more direct comments or questions on.
Okay, so
Not quite sure what you want us to do right now, sorry.
why don't we go back? So we will have to go through at some point, since we are over, once we determine who the list of folks that you folks want to fund are, we'll have to go through and do this level of cuts. Either by, doing a percentage cut across category, restricting a dollar amount on category, something like that. So we will have to get back to this level, but I think what might be the most useful at this point is to do look at this list, and we can highlight ones that folks had concerns about and discuss which ones we want to move forward with, and then go into the more detailed budget. Does that make sense? And I apologize, we retooled the presentation, but it's still, overall in this format that we had come up with, we would have to do a completely new presentation to do something else. So we're gonna have to patch it together. And Tristan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think this process makes sense. I guess I'll just say now what I've told you already, Rima, which is that I plan to conflict myself off of the discussion and vote for all of these. And so I may, if the opportunity arises again, I might give additional comment on general process, but I'm not going to participate in most of the discussion from henceforth.
Okay, thank you for that. So out of this list, and if you have, okay, so out of this list, were there specific, this is listed in the order of the score. And again, the score takes into consideration all of those statutory requirements and eligibility criteria and preferences as they're defined. So that should be reflected in the score. But this is our staff scoring in order. So are there programs in here that you would like to discuss as possibly not moving forward funding so that we can remove them from this funding scenario? And Simon, it looks like your hand is up.
Yeah, I don't believe that the Clackamas County Resolution Services should proceed for a funding allocation. I don't think it meets at least one of the required criteria, and I certainly don't think it meets some of the preferences.
And which was the required criteria?
Number 5.
Number 5. Okay, and so required criteria number 5, let me just make sure, is we need to put it on record.
Can you say what that is? What that
Yep.
criteria is?
So is that the one that's on this earlier slide here? Boom, 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 boom. Coordinating with community-based organizations, is that the one that you were referring to?
I don't think it demonstrates that strongly at all.
Okay, so let me just,
I also just think it's a generally weak application that would not score at my level at that way you guys have scored it.
so in their application, so they did list out existing community partnerships, and they did include letters of agreement laying out roles for organizations that they would partner with. And in the statute, it specifically states, so let's see. Oh, that's for system partners. So boom, boom, community-based organization. Let me just make sure. Okay, so that those were why they were scored as meeting that criteria. It's they have a partnership or plan to have partnership. We can put on record that you do not think that that is sufficient.
Yeah,
and then I'm sorry, what was the second part of that comment?
I was go on record that I think this is a weak application, extremely weak. And I don't personally, I won't vote to support this going forwards whenever you take a vote on it.
All right, let's go back. All right, so does anyone else have comments about Clackamas County Resolution Services? And Kathleen, your hand is up.
One of the things that concerned me about this application was that I didn't notice any real support for program participants. And from our preferences and things showing that that's a key element for programs, particularly when we're looking at restorative justice being a focus.
Okay. And do you happen to have anything more specific? I can go into that. So are you referring to the priority funding for direct services to the harm party and the person that committed harm?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay.
And I also had a question that it was a little unclear to me what reading through it, particularly when that they were talking about whether there was an income generation component to it. I'm pulling up here in their agency agreement. I couldn't tell if they were actually being paid for the services and also asking for grant funding. That was just a clarification that was unclear to me. If they were getting paid for a service that they were providing and requesting grant funding, or if those were separate, but I was unclear on that.
Okay, that's noted as a concern. I'm just going to flip to their, sorry. As I said, we're patching this together. It's not the most ideal. So just so that folks can have a list of their program description, et cetera, in front of them. And it looked like, Shannon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I struggled with this application too because just with like the definition of what restorative justice is for this program, I didn't really see any thing that stood out that showed that it would be an alternative to what was already in place in Clackamas County. It seemed that it would just maybe these funds or would integrate into what read to me like just ongoing like probation programs and investigation of youth that are already either in the system and have like a probation officer or are facing some sort of maybe disciplinary investigation or something at their school. So it didn't seem like I didn't see what was the alternative to the system that was already in place.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say similarly, I couldn't get clear I couldn't tell that they clearly understood the definition of restorative justice for the purpose of this funding, really focusing on more serious crimes and crimes that had a presumptive charge or outcome. So that one, and then just in the feedback, conversations about community engagement, community feedback, and I saw this in a lot of applications actually, that there were pathways for people who were directly engaged in the process to complete a pre and a post survey or to give feedback somewhere, but otherwise it felt pretty passive, you know, just open to hearing feedback. They were doing presentations about restorative justice, which gave people an opportunity to ask questions. And I didn't see a very active engagement. I also didn't see clear designation of collaboration with referral points of referral for these cases. So it just, there was a lot that felt very vague.
Okay, so again, it sounds like at least the pieces around serious harms are related to the priorities. So you're feeling that this application doesn't quite meet those priorities. And then, Himna, it looks like your hand is up as well. Did you have a conflict on this one? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I forgot to say it before we started the conversation that I am abstaining from the conversation on this one. Sorry. So I'm here, but I'm not voting or providing feedback.
Okay. And just to respond to some of that, so they did in their final application clarify it is a new program and it is a deflection program. So I know that kind of goes back to what Shannon said about not feeling like an expansion. They did respond to that in their final application. So overall, what I'm hearing for this specific application is there hasn't been anything that has made it uneligible, but there are some preferences that you guys feel like they are not necessarily meeting, which other programs might be meeting. Is that correct? And Elaine, it looks like your hand is up.
Well, I did want to say that I really appreciate it and actually wonder why we haven't had more emphasis on the connection and the braiding related to the deflection programs that are funded in various counties. To me, there's a natural potential for sort of cross referral and support folks to reduce recidivism and to keep people out of the justice system that goes with that. And so I really did appreciate that that was part of this conversation, but I wasn't really clear in their budget or in their conversation how they would envision those two funding streams. They didn't say they had it. They didn't say they didn't. But to me, it makes sense to me if you're going to use that language of deflection program to really incorporate what's happening across the state around deflection and the funding that's coming into counties for that. And I didn't get a clear picture of that. I appreciated the correlation, but I didn't get clarity about how that was going to work together, if at all.
Okay, and thank you for the comment. Again, that is kind of outside of the scope of what was in the actual application, the information we requested from them. I do just want to summarize. So we have, a lot of funds to cut. So as long as we apply these preferences consistently, we can say that this does not meet, the threshold for number of preferences, and we can choose not to fund it. And that's sort of what I've gotten from the conversation so far. So is that what folks are kind of in agreement on?
I certainly think so.
Okay, so
I don't understand the question. Could you state it again specifically?
So they technically meet the eligibility requirements based on their responses to the final application. It sounded from the conversation, there were some areas in the preferences where they could have better met those preferences. Since we have such a a high ask compared to how much funding available, we can apply, we can choose not to fund someone based on them not meeting those preferences as well as some other programs do, as long as we do that consistently. So I'm saying, is the decision not to fund this program because they don't meet those preferences in the way that you would like them applied? And the decision is to not fund them. And if that's so, we should have a vote for that. I don't know if that made any more sense. I just said a bunch of words, so I apologize.
Are you asking us to vote on not funding them?
Yeah, at this point, what we're trying to do is vote on the ones we don't want to fund, identify and vote on the ones we don't want to fund so we can take them out of the equation and then go in and do more in-depth cuts to the ones that we decide we want to fund, because that seemed to be the clearest path forward. We will have to, if that's the decision for this specific one, if it's about those priorities, we'll have to use that same logic on all the rest of the applications. We could decide not to fund them based on them not meeting those preferences, or we could decide to, cut it by X% or something like that if you still want to fund them.
So Simon, can I ask you to really clearly state the ways you don't think this application meets muster or meets the requirements? Just succinctly, clear.
I think that they don't demonstrate those strong community relationships in how they answered the questions. And I think there's just a lot of vagueness in what they propose doing. I just don't think it's strong. And I don't think it meets the criteria threshold. I just think it's a weak application that hasn't made a strong case for how it will actually deliver. And I don't think it's credible in what it's proposing.
Do you want... Do you want to change the ranking of this to a lower rank based on that feedback? Like, do we want to rank this in the bottom? Because again, we can take away, oops, sorry. We can say they didn't meet that preference, but that will only lower their score a little bit. Since there are, again, so many high scores, that might get us, if we're applying a consistent methodology, folks that don't meet the preferences and therefore don't get funded, that might work out, but we do need to make sure it's consistent, if that makes sense. And Elaine, you have a hand up?
Well, even in the description, expand relationship with the juvenile department, prevent youth up to age 18 from justice by establishing RJ programming in schools. Didn't they take away the school's involvement?
They did.
I mean, that's the other thing, is that this ranking and these numbers are actually matching the original, but it changed when so some of the application is really different. They don't have the partnership they thought they have. They're no longer going to be operating in schools. They're talking about reviving a Clackamas County Restorative Justice Coalition that is not active right now. So all of it is pretty speculative and no longer definitive like it originally meant to be. So two things happened. One is there's some vagueness to start with, but the other is that the proposal changed pretty dramatically between the first application and answering the questions. And so I'm surprised that the RFGP criteria and the preferences numbers didn't change based on their re-upped answers. It's almost like it went down because of the reality of their circumstances, not just the quality of the application, but the reality that was in the grant application, not outside of scope information, but just what they said was now different, both in terms of what they can do and what they hope to do and what's already in place to do those things. It got looser and less solid based on those changes, not better and tighter.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. So we
Rima,
can,
I don't know if I'm going to help you out or not, but as a GAC committee member, I would put forward a motion that that this application doesn't proceed for funding.
And I would second that.
okay, so let me think about this for a second. So we can accept the vote and move forward. Sorry, we were just trying to figure out how to specifically say that. We can say that, you know, based on what you said, having listing out possible community partners is not a strong enough example of actually having those community partnerships. And then based on that preference, we can change, we can change their RJ preferences met to 6 out of 7. We had many applicants that met all 7 preferences, so that will push their ranking down. So their total score, we're not going to update at this point, but their preference and that how they met that one criteria, the eligibility criteria, pushes their ranking down. So we can vote not to fund them based on that reason, but we have to then apply that reason to any other application in similar situations. So any other application where there's, maybe not a strong referral partnership in place that will impact all of the implementation programs that don't have those strong partnerships yet. And then the preferences, basically anyone who is not getting all 7 preferences are now on the list of folks to be cut, just to be consistent in how we're applying the methodology. Do you still want to move forward with the motion with that in mind?
I'm lost, Rima. I'm sorry.
So
I know you're going to say the same thing again, and I guess I'm struggling with this process.
So we have to have.
I would rather we make a bunch of decisions, and if people want to appeal, then they appeal. We're struggling. I'm struggling personally. I feel like we're tying ourselves in
Yeah.
a bunch of pretzel knots, and we'll never get anywhere. And we may as well then take a spurious, ridiculous approach and just say, approve anyone over this score and cut everyone by 50% and have a bunch of programs that don't deliver anything. That would be a disaster, but I feel like that's the direction we might end up going. Unless we come up with a different approach. I'm really struggling, and I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I think we can either apply our judgment to each application. Yes, it may make sense for you folks on your end to change the scoring based on our feedback to justify the decision, but I don't, that's not the justification for this decision. The justification is not that 91.5 score. The justification is that there were vague answers, that there are unclear community partnerships, that some of the things that it sounds like you thought you saw, we didn't see. And so I don't know how I could take that whole picture and then apply it exactly the same to any other application. I'm sort of in the same camp as Simon, sort of saying it's not going to be the same. We're taking them each in their own right. And if you need to do something around the preferences or around the RFGP criteria because you learned something new from our feedback, go ahead and do that, but the feedback will not be exactly the same for any of the other applicants. The feedback will not be lower the score because these same criteria were applied exactly the same. I don't think we can do that. I really agree that we have to take each one in turn and trust you to do what you need to do for whatever process, but otherwise it's just a scoring metric. It's not our feedback.
And Kathleen, what was your comment?
I just have to agree 100%. When I reviewed the proposals, I reviewed each one as an individual proposal and didn't review them against each other. And that's, I think, where we're coming up challenged by the process. And I understand the process that you're putting forth, but that isn't necessarily how I entered into this process on my own to review the proposals. So there are certain things that I looked at all the different criteria, but the way the proposal was written, the information that was provided, I might rate one proposal higher, even if, one is a 6 versus a 7 and, preferences or meeting the criteria.
So we do have to apply criteria across all applications. That is part of the process. What that looks like can be different than what we're doing right now, but we will have to stop, reconvene, and do another meeting. Because at this point, I'm not sure how to move forward. We do have to base it off of a score or something like that, some objective number or metric. That is just how the process has to go. We did try to include your feedback in the scoring criteria that we used. As I said, we did a group process to try and make sure we were applying it consistently among ourselves. And then we had that opportunity for application feedback with the preliminary. So I think we would have to come up with a new new methodology that would take other things into account if that's how you wanted to move forward. So it is a competitive grant, so they have to be looked at, against each other. So Tristan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, this is a general process comment. I'm not commenting on this application.
Okay.
It strikes me that there may be disagreement on, so like we've got these different eligibility criteria. We have the RFGP criteria, the preferences. And it seems like there's maybe a differing opinion between the CJC's, analysis of whether that criteria is met and whether the grant review committee is compelled by how that criteria came through in the application. Maybe the way to do this to meet everybody's needs in terms of like integrating the opinions of the grant review committee and our holistic review of these applications, as well as the objective criteria that the CJCs needs to meet, is just to go through that criteria for like put up. I don't know if you can just like put up that criteria, and then we can talk about why we think it is strong or not strong. And I also think that that should be the analysis, right? Are we compelled by it? Are we not compelled by it? Not just if it is met, because we don't have enough money to fund every single program. And so I think there has to be some determination around, do we think this is, compelling? Maybe it exists, but it's really weak. That has to matter in a process where we only have, less than half the money that's been requested.
I agree that the way that we've done this before, you've been able to put up all of the criteria met, and but it's true that there is disagreement. If we don't think that some of these things, like, and one of the criteria is coordinating with community-based organizations, I don't know that I would say that this application shows that. And you've given them a point for it, or you've counted that they met that criteria. When again, things pretty significantly changed between the initial application and what we got back for answers. And so I don't think we're in agreement, but I also really appreciate that we do get to lean into compelling aspects of, even if we have all of it at its minimum standard, that doesn't mean it's as well established or as well shown or as strong as another application that also met the minimum requirements. So I do think we need to be allowed to say, yeah, they may have met bare minimum, but they're not really showing as robust a set of community connections, as clear a process, as strong an understanding of restorative justice. I do think those won't show up in scoring metrics, but they should show up in our expertise and our feedback.
So we can absolutely do that. I guess my comment and maybe point of confusion is, we can say that they didn't meet that eligibility criteria related to coordinating with CBOs, but we just have to make sure that if we come across any other application that has a similar circumstance, we use the similar logic.
Absolutely. We should.
Yes. So
should.
we can vote this one off, and we can, sorry, I keep clicking on it accidentally. We can change this to a ranking of like, does not meet according to GAC. So that's its final rank, taking into consideration all these things. We choose not to fund it, and we move on to the next one. We just have to make sure that we apply the same logic to the next application that is in a similar situation.
I think there's another way to do this. If we go through and change the rankings and the scorings of every single one, then we've undone all your work. Why don't we?
We can just add to it.
But we don't need to change the ranking. We are giving you our information. Your ranking is fine. It was the CJC staff ranking. That's fine. You did that already. We don't need to redo math or change things around or make them ineligible.
I'm just saying we would make note of your ranking. We would make note of your ranking, not change our ranking. Make note of yours.
And I'm not sure we have a ranking. What we're telling you is that we looked at each one separately. So it's not about a ranking compared across the different applicants. This is where we land on this one. This is where we land on this one. And it's not a 1, 2, 3 through 13. It's not a ranking. It's our feedback on the strength of the application. And that's different than a ranking. So I want to unmix those terms. Your ranking put them in an order. We're not trying to reorder them. We're trying to tell you where we land on each one. And then we'll, that's kind of where I see us needing to go with this.
And Simon, what was your comment?
I think it was that, it was like being clear on the term. Yeah, I'm going to stop, lower my hand.
Oh, this is Shannon Wilson.
Shannon, yep.
Yeah, I just if yeah, I guess I think that we're going to keep running into trouble if we don't have like I think and again, I know that the like staff are trying to do what DOJ says, have the criterion scored, but if there wasn't consensus on whether or not like different parts of the scoring rubric were met, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, it's just like we're going to be so then you're just going to be left with like the staff has a total score, but if we were to go through like the different yeah, just like different parts of the rubric, like there are clearly things that I'm assuming staff offered points for that this group would not. Like for instance, like training, right? Like in this application, like it's clear like they have no plans for training. They don't even know who to contact for training. But were there points given for that? Because if you have a total score of 91.5, you know, and that portion was like, I don't know, I don't have it up in front of me, but like say it was like 10 points and staff gave a full 10 points for that because they mentioned that, oh, we imagine training will be something that happens. We don't know what it would be or who we would contact. That to me wouldn't meet that rubric. So I'm just thinking like we might be really frustrated through this process if there's not some just like kind of foundational consensus to begin with. Just want to say that.
So you can absolutely disagree with those points. I think we went through that initial criteria in more detail in the preliminary application review. That's where the feedback came in. If you have a specific concern, we can absolutely note it, and that can be, you know, part of your reason as to why you don't agree with this staff score and you decide not to fund it. That's perfectly acceptable. You know, this is a baseline. Like I said, all of this feedback is legitimate and fine. I think we can, you know, it's on record now. We just have to make sure that we apply the same logic across the board to be consistent. So we can maybe go back to the vote to decide whether to move forward with funding for this one or not, and then move on to the next one where folks, you know, think that they shouldn't be funded, and we can document the reasons and go through the list and see where we're at. Or we can decide to try a different methodology and reconvene at another time. It's really up to you guys. If this is just too far outside of where you guys are at, I don't know how we'll have to change it, but we could, or we could document these concerns, take a vote, and move forward.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for that. That was really helpful. So I have a follow-up question. Maybe this will help us get clarity. So would it be sufficient for us to like make a motion saying, you know, reviewing the criteria, reviewing the scoring rubric, this group does not agree with the total staff score, and then make our decision? Like, can we say something like that? Would that be consistent enough for purposes like, you know, saying, yes, we will, you know, we're looking at the same criteria. We're going to apply the same considerations to all applicants considering all of that, we do not agree with the staff score and would vote so on and so forth. Would that be enough?
So you don't have to necessarily vote to agree or not agree with the staff score. We can just note the concerns and you can vote on whether or not to fund it. The staff score is just a starting point, so you don't necessarily have to agree or not agree with it.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
You just have to articulate the reason why you make a decision, whatever that decision is, and then make sure it's consistent. So going back to the question, do we want to move forward or do we want to retool the analysis?
I would advocate we try and move forward.
Okay. So
I agree with that.
Okay, let's go ahead and try and take a vote on this. We have documented the reasons, and we'll try internally to make sure that, to remind you folks, if it doesn't come up in conversation in relation to other applications with similar circumstances, but please, if you notice yourself, speak up. So let's go ahead and do a vote if we could get a motion.
It's Simon again. I mean, I did the first motion just to be helpful, so I'm happy to repeat that motion. That I put forward a motion to not fund the Clackamas County Resolution Services proposal.
Okay.
I second that. This is Kathleen.
All right. And Avery, can we go ahead and do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Do we need to, as part of the motion, document why, Rima?
I think we have notes on that already. And the reasons were around the collaboration. There was not strong enough evidence of their collaboration with CBOs in place, and then also the preferences that weren't met.
Okay.
Is that sufficient, Avery?
I would probably like to know which preferences are not met. If one of the GAC members could.
They did already state it a while ago, number 5. Oh, that was for the eligibility. It was I think it was number 6 on the preferences, supporting program participants. So it was stated.
Wonderful. I just wanted to get that as part of summarization.
Motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So
I'm clear now. Thank you.
okay.
Brandon Brown,
Agree to not fund.
Elaine Walters,
Agree.
Kathleen Meehan Coop,
Agree.
Shannon Wilson,
Agree.
Simon Fulford,
Agree.
Tristan Edwards,
Abstain.
Jimena Espina Todd,
I'm abstaining as well.
So we actually don't have enough voting members then, Rima.
Okay. So
Rima, this is Rachel. Can I
mhm,
break in real quick?
yeah.
At this point, if you all want to move forward with a vote, you can triage to get to the number 6. You can ask those that are abstaining to vote if you would like to move forward with a vote on this. They've said that they've abstaining, they can still vote, they just can't discuss anything. Or the group can table this and come back to it when there are more people here. It's up to the group, but I think it's 2 that abstained. One of them or 2 of them can vote if needed.
We have somebody else coming back at 11:15. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would vote to wait so that we don't put our 2 abstainers on the spot.
Tristan, looks like your hand is up.
Yeah, I would note, I don't have, under the CJC guidelines, I don't think I have a direct conflict on this one. So I would feel comfortable voting for the sake of moving this along. And I would agree with everyone else and vote not to fund this.
And we were also removed from the application, and I will agree to not fund it.
Okay. I think that is sufficient to move forward. So, so they have been cut. So let's go back to that overall list, and we can talk about the next one that folks have concerns on. And sorry for making you all dizzy as I go backwards. So CCRS is gone. So is there any other applications on this list that you folks have, significant concerns on and don't think that we should be funding, excuse me?
I had actually a real question about the Center for Dialogue and Resolution. I thought the work that they were doing is very restorative, but I was confused reading through their additional feedback on whether or not they were engaging in post-adjudication work. And there was a statement on page 4 when I printed it out. It said, with respect to new post-adjudication referrals coming from Lane County. So that's why I wasn't sure if it actually met the criteria or not.
So I can check where we landed in our final. So that was a question that we had in our preliminary application, and they did respond adequately. But again, if you don't feel, or according to the staff scoring, but if you don't feel that they provided enough information in the final application to meet that criteria, then that can be your comment on record.
Yeah, my concern was primarily it was kind of they were almost talking into circles. And I don't necessarily disagree with the argument that they're making that post-adjudication work can be restorative, but I feel like that was the argument that they were making, which unfortunately still doesn't line up with the requirements of this particular grant opportunity.
Okay. Does anyone else? Oh, Simon, it looks like your hand is up.
Just to say on that list, there's no other grant application or grant proposal that I deem sort of ineligible or doesn't meet the criteria. I do think some are much stronger than others. Some of that, my assessment would be very different to some of that scoring. But so I'm going on record to say there's none others that I don't think should possibly be funded, although I think there's some that are much stronger and have demonstrated the strength of their proposals versus others.
Okay, so for a point of clarity, Kathleen, are you saying that just to make sure that they don't meet that eligibility criteria for being funded through an RJ grant, and you think they should not be funded?
For this particular grant opportunity that is supposed to be pre-adjudication, I do not think they meet that criteria based on what they provided in their follow-up responses.
Okay, and do we have any other comments or conversation around that or CDR from other GAC members?
I'm a little confused about this one because it does have an expungement and we're talking about youth. So it's an interesting kind of position. It's not that it depends on what you call adjudication at some level. An adjudication, it's pre-conviction. It's not necessarily pre-formal engagement, but it talked really clearly about the expungement pathway. as sort of the outcome. And so I don't know if they just needed more words to clarify that, but I didn't have the same reaction to it not matching when they talked about the expungement. The way they're using the word adjudication, it's just different in juvenile cases than it is in adult cases. And so, you know, similarly, folks were talking about before there was even law enforcement contact, like no formal contact, and that has its own confusion too. So does it, I guess I want to ask the CJC staff, given your sort of understanding of the criteria making this fit the requirements, how did you see that fit the definition of restorative justice in regards to expungement and reducing criminal time in a treatment facility or a juvenile justice facility?
So we did, I mean, we did score them as meeting that criteria. They talk about youth entering a formal accountability agreement and deferred disposition, or deferred adjudication, which would put them in that RJ space. I do want to point out here that they only met 6 out of 7 of the preferences. So based on the conversation regarding the last application, you know, they would maybe not be fundable since they're not meeting all the preferences at this point in time.
Which one did they not meet?
So the one they didn't meet is it's the same one as the last one was dinged on, so not prioritizing funding for direct services to the harm party and the responsible party. So unless folks feel that their answer was different in some way, at least on that point, they're in a similar position as the last applicant, although the last applicant had that eligibility piece as well. And Shannon, looks like your hand's up.
Yeah, maybe I'm just a little bit more like reading this from a different lens, but so I guess it's possible that their pre-adjudication program could be like a no charge situation, or where the DA holds on to deciding whether or not to even file anything, in which case they wouldn't need a dismissal. And then you can get a dismissal, and the DA can make a decision not to move forward on something in which you would still to wipe out the arrest record, you still need to follow like a process. So they might be like thinking about a motion to seal the arrest record and use the expungement instead of that. But because you still, if something is dismissed or not moving forward, then you're immediately eligible for that to be removed, which can be really helpful for housing, employment, things like that. So that might be what they're talking about.
Thank you. So did that address your questions and concerns, Kathleen, or
that does help provide me with additional information. I think the challenge that I guess then comes down to, we're trying to base it off the information that was provided actually in the proposals. And so to be honest, right now I'm probably sitting on the fence a little bit on this one then.
okay, we can take a vote at this point to fund or not fund this, or to not fund or move forward with this specific application, and move on to the next one, or we can continue discussing it.
I mean, I would be interested to hear from the other reviewers on whether or not I was the only one who had that challenge with this proposal.
Kathleen, it's Simon, or committee, it's Simon. I hadn't picked up on that. So I didn't, I'd have to go back and read things a lot more in depth to see what I did or didn't miss. And I'm happy to proceed with a potential funding allocation.
And Tristan, your hand is up as well.
I just am commenting on something I am reading directly from this application that I think relates exactly to what Kathleen is talking about, just in terms of our conversation around eligibility. For their adult program, it states in their application that once the restorative, it says the restorative process is complete when a reparation agreement is co-created by all parties and fulfilled to all parties' satisfaction, at which point the circuit court is notified and the case is dismissed. I think for me that goes to the point around whether this is falling within the eligibility around not resulting in a conviction being, pre-adjudication, I don't think is the language in the definition of restorative justice in the rules. I think that relates specifically to the adult program. That just seemed relevant for this discussion about whether it's actually eligible or not.
Any other comments or questions on the application for CDR? And again, our options here are to, I think, oh, Elaine, you have your hand up?
Well, you're probably about to do these as options. I guess at this point, I would like to table this one until we see where some of the others go, because that may help, rather than just a straight vote one way or another, which will kind of hem us in. I mean, if we vote to not fund, it gives us more money, but we may change our minds. And so I kind of would like to table this one for further discussion as we move through. That would be my motion.
Are folks in agreement with that? We don't have to necessarily do a full vote on that, but I see heads nodding. All right.
Sure.
So let's go back to the main list here. Make you dizzy yet again. So are there any other applications at this point that folks had eligibility concerns on, or just felt they weren't sufficient to be considered for funding? And Elaine, your hand is up, but it might be just stuck. Okay. From before.
Rima, before we move on, can you go back to that slide that just showed like what the funding is that we have after the review you guys did?
Yeah. So it's a little bit lower now because we took out
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we have $2,150,464 left to cut with taking out CCRS. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I'm so sorry. I'm getting dizzy myself too. Okay, so anything else on this list? I'm not hearing anything. So in that case, I mean, there are multiple ways we can proceed. We can apply the preferences. So we go back through and, you know, determine not to fund folks that don't meet all of the preferences to a certain point. We could do across the board cuts, or we could do cuts on specific categories. How would you folks like to proceed? The scenario you guys originally chose was based on ranking. So, you know, how it originally was conceived was we were just going to award the highest ranked applicants. If we did an across the board haircut, quote unquote, it would be 35% of all budgets. Elaine, what's your comment, please?
Well, I agree with the ranking, but I don't think we're at the ranking decision. That's what we need to keep doing. We need to keep ranking. We need to go through them in order to get to a ranking, and then we can look at where there's 20% off of already taken, and then look at what that leaves us with with the new ranking. I just think we need to go through and rank.
And how would you like to?
With our input? I don't know. I mean, I think we could use the ranking that you're starting with. It sounds a little bit like we just bumped CDR down a little bit, but I don't know who goes over them yet without just going through them. So I almost wonder if we shouldn't start at the ones that you've ranked the lowest and see if we can add to move them, and then just see if we can get them in an order.
Okay. So the suggestion is to start with resolve and move up. And so are folks on board with that? And I think it would be good to kind of clarify what else we're looking at to determine this ranking.
Well, and in particular, if you can show us that evaluation document that shows the preferences and tell us where they're coming out low from your perspective, so that we can look at it ourselves. I think anything that you can do to cross-reference how you got to your score gives us something to work with.
So the scoring sheet that we used is the same one that's available online with the application from the preliminary application on. I can, verbally say areas that were marked down. It might be difficult to go back and forth visually, though. But if folks want to refer to that scoring sheet that's from way back in the beginning of the process, hopefully you have copies of that. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that if nobody else, or if folks agree with that. I don't see any disagreement. Okay. I'm going to click forward in the presentation. Bear with me for a moment. All the way to the end. So here is resolve. So based on our staff analysis, they met 4 of the 7 preferences. So this does put them below even the ones that we, CCRS, which we kicked out already. Do folks have comments, questions, concerns about this application?
Hey, sorry, Simon speaking. I'm answering whatever the question is. Again, I think this meets the criteria as you checked. I don't think it's the strongest of proposals. I think there's a number of others that are much stronger. If there's money to be allocated, I would, I think it's a program worthy of funding. And if we're getting very cutthroat, it certainly goes into one of my groupings of the weaker quote proposal and programs.
Okay. And
If
Kathleen?
that's helpful context.
It is all helpful comments.
I would agree with what Simon said. I also was a little confused because they talked about working with the DA's office, and then when I've printed it out on page 11, there's a statement about halfway down that says, however, it's important to note that Resolve will only accept cases that have not involved formal intervention by police, the courts, or other judicial entities. So that provided me with some confusion after they said they were working with the DA's office.
Okay. And Elaine, your hand is up as well.
Identical issue.
Okay.
And then it looks like the funds are really being used primarily to add a community referral pathway that would include a wider range of potential participants than young adults. So I hope I'm reading that correctly. And it sounds like they're interested in increasing capacity to handle more serious cases, but it wasn't clear to me that they already have that capacity or a clear pathway to that capacity to handle presumptive cases with presumptive prison time outside of it just didn't feel as strong.
And that is one of the reasons why we mark them down as not meeting that preference. So, yeah. So based on those few comments, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like this is still one of the lower ranked applications. You're in agreement that they don't meet all the preferences. If we're being consistent with how we made the decision previously, you may choose not to fund it based on the number of preferences not met, but that is up to you folks. So do you guys have any comments or recommendations beyond what is on this slide based on or for their eligibility?
I don't have a comment about changing it, but I like this process because now we can go to the next one and sort of see if it's still lining out in this order, and then we can make our decisions.
So you're fine with the position in the ranking of this application? Is that what I'm hearing?
At the moment, yes. As we go up, it may change, but let's keep going. Mm-hmm.
Are other GAC members in agreement with that? Okay.
Yes.
So Resolve is currently still at the right spot. Okay. So then the next one up is going to be neighbor to neighbor. So do you folks have any comments or recommendations beyond what's shown on this slide and the summary of the staff's analysis? Or any comments or concerns in general? And Elaine, your hand is up.
Just noting, and I'm assuming that these are the 4 preferences rather than the 7. It seems really limited to nonviolent offenses and offenses that are approved under what is currently the DA diversion program, and I wasn't 100% clear that the overlap was exactly in alignment with the definition of restorative justice. So, and under development of the partnerships and additional resources seem very underdeveloped to me, and weren't really named besides the Public Service Coordinating Council, the Benton County gang, that they would be getting, participating as part of. I didn't have a strong sense of their community connections or support.
So I will say that if other folks are in agreement with that analysis, that would put them in the same category as CCRS for not meeting that specific eligibility point number 5, as well as not meeting those preferences, as you stated. Kathleen?
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that popped out to me, and I agree with Elaine's comments, was that when I was reviewing their MOU, it really kind of focused a lot on the fact that it was a 1-year pilot. And when comparing all the different programs, and the goal of this was a 2-year biennium, it was unclear to me whether or not they were just trying to go for 1 year, and if that should be a priority over a program that was looking to fund the full time period as well.
Thank you. And Simon?
I just think there's a difference in the community sort of connection piece or partnerships. Is the Clackamas County is a system entity, and the intent of these funds and the grant is to develop more, is partnerships in the community, and they didn't demonstrate that. Neighbor to Neighbor is in and of itself a community organization in the community. So I kind of just see those as slightly different, because I didn't see that. Again, I think it's a program that needs further development. I think our funds could help it do more further development. And this is this kind of funny balancing act where obviously some projects are quote further along and others are not. But to me, I wanted to clarify that piece about I do think it fit that criteria number 5 or whatever that was.
Any other comments on this? I do want to, sorry, go ahead.
I did kind of like, in my mind, I definitely had for sure 1, 2, yeah, like 1, 2, 3, like 5 that really looked like they were kind of in the like beginning. I'm wondering if it'd be helpful, would it be helpful for the script to identify like who those 5 were that are kind of like more of in the discovery phase and like partnership building phase on their journey, and come up with like, for these 5, here's the amount that this group feels is appropriate, and we can just do it uniform across the board. Like maybe that would save us a chunk of time, but maybe I'm derailing things. I'm trying to offer something helpful, truly. And I just see these, like this application being part of those other 5 that I see kind of being in a similar position.
So this is an implementation program, as was CCRS. That was identified in that preliminary application review. I'm happy to say that verbally if folks, don't have that in front of them, and I apologize. We just took it off the slides because there was a lot of information. Tristan, I see your hand up. Do you have a conflict with this specific application?
No, I am going to choose to abstain on this application regardless. I had a comment on process that kind of corresponds to what Shannon was suggesting. So if I can just make a comment, not on this application, but on the process that we're taking.
Okay.
So it strikes me that, yeah, there are 5 applications that are purporting to create new programs. And I'm sorry, Rima, I don't know if this fits into, what you've been talking about, but from a just fiscally responsible perspective and thinking about the future, and that this grant, we don't have reason to believe that this grant program in the future, at this point in time, at least, there's no basis to think that we're going to get more than $4 million every year. And so I feel like from a fiscally responsible perspective, we should be mindful of how many new programs we're investing in when we also have established programs that we're hoping will grow over time. And so maybe an approach, and I'll let you check me on this, but an approach could be assessing what new programs are applying, which ones we think are good new programs to invest in, and then going back and looking at the existing programs and seeing where cuts can be made to those budgets to allow for the funding of the new programs we think are good investments.
That is certainly a funding strategy. I will say, we would have to significantly cut. I think all scenarios require significant cuts, but based on what we have voted already on CCRS, I don't know that we can step back now and do a new scenario, if that makes sense, because we already have sort of moved forward with this process.
It feels more like a way of organizing our conversation, what Tristan is offering, rather than a new scenario, because I do think that there is going to be some structure that's going to make sense. And I think that the reason that we voted away from funding that other proposal doesn't preclude that. It simply wasn't strong in either category, as new or as existing. So I don't think that would preclude us from sort of thinking openly about the category of proposal that we're talking about.
Simon, what was your comment?
My comment is this is all hard for all of us. Just more note. My comment about how we're assessing kind of quote the programs that are going from that planning phase to an implementation, and those that are on have had 3 years of development, is at least 2 of the existing programs, as I read their proposals, are actually doing a pretty significant shift. And anyway, which makes me think differently about their next journey, and whether they the amount of funding they've asked for they have relevant to what they now want to do is appropriate. In a scenario where we're cutting, we have half the amount of money than is being asked for in total anyway.
So I think for the sake of consistency, we need to, here, hold on just a second. Just continue going on one by one through the applications, to update the ranking if needed based on the pathway that we chose previously. I think adding in the additional consideration as a group of implementation versus existing might be overcomplicating when we're just looking one by one, and might add to the confusion at this point. Simon ran away. So I guess I still haven't heard anything necessarily, there was a comment about them not having necessarily meeting that eligibility requirement number 5 about community partnerships, and then Simon's statement about them being a CBO, so it not applying to them necessarily the same way. Based on just a literal reading of the statute, there is no differentiation between CBO and partners in the language for that specific requirement. So, you know, to be consistent, I would think that they also don't meet. And we do have this agreement based on the conversation that they don't necessarily meet all the preferences. So based on how we looked at the last application, Resolve, the consensus was to continue or to keep them as a lower ranked and not move their rank up any. Can we make the same decision for this specific application? Or do folks feel that this actually warrants a change in rank based on how we are approaching it currently? So with the last application, Resolve, we decided that the ranking was appropriate. So with this one, is the ranking appropriate? Do we want to keep them in the bottom category, or do we want to move them up? I think that's the decision that we started making with the last one, and we should continue.
I would, yes, I support that.
Okay. And I know we didn't address all of the issues with the implementation versus existing programs, but I think we can come back to that, but maybe we should complete this process before we add anything else to it.
I would agree that this stays in the category that it's currently in at the bottom.
Okay. Is there anyone that disagrees with that? Nope. All right. So currently Resolve and Neighbor to Neighbor are still sort of in the bottom category. We haven't determined to not fund them, but they're in the lower ranking. So the next one on our list is Transformative Justice Community Regroup. So what are folks' thoughts about this? Do you agree with the staff ranking? Are there, you know, eligibility or preference concerns that we should note? And Simon, your hand is up.
I mean, I think I personally I thought it was actually a strong proposal, and they demonstrated a lot of good community connections. In sort of a quote, my ranking is they scored higher up.
Okay. So your proposal would be to rank them higher.
Yeah.
And Elaine?
Yeah, I'm looking for my note sheet, but I felt like the concerns that we asked them about specifically around serving folks prior, you know, pre-adjudication, that we were really worried about because they were post-incarcerated folks, really got addressed very well in this proposal. And I felt like it's a unique proposal. I know we have had you know, it's been tricky to think about how to sort of be consistent when there's creativity. There's another application that sort of is there too, but I noticed that more of the applications are doing community referrals and self-referral, but they're being clearer and clearer about the qualifications and eligibility requirements. And I felt like what they came back with was much clearer and much stronger. I'm also aware that sometimes they use language that's a little outside of this sort of more formal language, but I've read it several times now, and I agree that this one could move up.
Okay.
And I don't know up to where or on top of who. I just don't see them as at the bottom.
Got it. So the current proposal on the table is to move this up in ranking. And Kathleen, it looks like you maybe had something to say.
I'll hold off. Never mind.
Okay. Is anyone opposed or have other comments about where this lands in the staff analysis? Nope. All right. So if that's the case, we'll go ahead and move to the next one.
I do have a question, Rima
Sure.
Jimena here. I just want to mention these, that we are making the exception of this application being able to have language outside the norm. We didn't give the same privilege to the Centro Cultural application in the last round. Just mentioning that. They also
Okay.
had language that was outside of the restorative justice lingos and all of that. They are not, for sure. I'm not saying this application has that. Not at all, absolutely not. But we're making some exceptions that we didn't feel able to make in the prior selection. So
Thank you
I
for
also
that.
have some questions about some budget items here.
Okay, and we'll come back to that when we get through with the ranking portion. And Elaine, you put your hand back up.
Yeah, thank you, Jimena, for saying that. It has been really tricky to try to read in and add the cultural lens to everything. It's been really tricky. I will say that I had that a lot more for this application until they answered these questions, that I felt like they cleaned up a lot of their language in alignment with the way the grant requirements were. So I was pleased about that, and I'm sad that not everybody has had the ability to be supported the way we might have wanted them to put in an application. So thank you for saying that.
Right. Any other comments or questions or re-ranking proposals for this one? I do want to note that we have an hour and a half left in our meeting today and a lot to get through. So I think we're in a good spot right now to move forward, but just wanted to remind everyone of the time. So if there's nothing else, we'll move to the next one. Okay. So 6 Rivers. So the goal here is to rank this or to determine if the staff analysis for this application, if there are any questions or concerns about eligibility or preferences that are not documented here that you want to note, and maybe might change their ranking up or down. And Simon?
I'm confused at their ranking being so low, where I feel like they're one of the strongest programs that have been developed and structured. So
Okay,
I would rank them a lot higher.
A lot higher, excellent. And Kathleen, it looks like your hand was up next.
I would agree 100%.
Okay.
I ranked it a lot higher.
Okay. And Elaine, is your hand just stuck from previously?
No, similarly, I would have ranked this one higher as well.
Okay.
And I really appreciated some of their community collaboration. Creativity was pretty different and unique around working with programs that provide community health workers and ongoing case management, having those kind of community connections. I think they did an excellent job. They also have district attorneys agreements and youth services agreements. So I think that there are some things, and it brings me to the question that I keep having, which is, if there's a 7 out of 7 and they met the criteria, I don't understand the differences in the total score. And how, because it does put people up and down. And so again, it's just tricky. And thanks for taking our feedback.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I don't understand how a 7 out of 7 that met all the criteria is above or below another. So it's not so obvious to me. So
I think their scoring that brought them down was related to the budget and how thoroughly and completely their budget was completed. But I thank you for that feedback. It sounds like this, in general, we're moving up to maybe a higher category that it's in now. It's kind of in the middle, and you're saying it should be in the high end. Are we in agreement on that? Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, stand in restorative justice. So are there disagreements, questions, concerns related to this application, the staff analysis, and whether or not you want to move 6 or stand in restorative justice up or down in this scale, ranking scale? Elaine?
I don't have such an opinion about how you move it up and down, but I did have concerns, and I wanted to know, maybe somebody else saw something that I didn't. It says that the program will not be handling cases, nor will any referral partners be referring cases with a presumptive prison sentence. I read that in their application. So is that why you have 6 out of 7 of the requires? Is that the one that's missing? Because, or does it not meet the criteria? So I was just,
yeah, that is the one that it was marked down on, since that is a preference, so they did not get the point for that preference.
That just seems like one of our more significant ones, which is the presumptive prison sentence and the reduction of the likelihood that somebody will end up incarcerated. So I just, the other thing is that there wasn't really a clear description of how cases would be handled if a responsible party doesn't want to engage. They didn't bounce it back to saying that the case would be sent back, or there was no clarification around that in this application. So
okay, so
I would bump it down a little bit, especially under the ones that we just bumped up.
So based on what you're saying, this would not disqualify it. It's not a question about eligibility for funding or ranking low enough that they're not getting funded at this point in time. We would just move it down to maybe the lower category with some of the other that are still in the lower category, neighbor to neighbor and resolve, in that grouping.
Maybe I think I'm getting decision fatigue around the, I mean, to me, those are clear, not necessarily disqualifiers, but they're at a level of some of the other disqualifiers that we've talked about. So I don't know how it lands. I really am. My brain is kind of tired. If it doesn't matter, then we just move them down rather than disqualify.
Yeah, we can move them down below Six Rivers and TJC. Simon, what was your comment?
Yeah, I picked up on. I'm off my. I picked up on that too, Elaine. I think that obviously